Well, welcome everyone to Brewmore's winter microbrew. Hopefully, some of you are returning Brewmore attendees, and some of you are new. I'm Becky Delventhal. I'm currently the chair of the Brewmore Steering Committee. Brewmore, for those of you who aren't familiar, is just an organization like a volunteer group of faculty and postdocs and just generally science educators who are interested in supporting this mission of promoting experiential learning, specifically in the biology classroom, primarily focused at the undergraduate level. And we've been around for just a few years. This actually sort of grew out of the yeast GSA community, which I am not a part of, as you can tell. I am from the fly GSA community, but I've really enjoyed being a part of, helping organize these events that really supports undergraduate involvement in research and the faculty and educators sort of involved in that effort. So the members of this steering committee, we've got a big steering committee this year. It's been really great. Mike Law, he was chair last year. He's vice chair this year. Ken Kaplan, Jill Keeney, Fernando Tenho, me, Cindy Voisin, Bryce Taylor, Brian Wasco, Kelly Carroll, Trisha Staub, Josie Steinhauer, Sean Coleman, Dondra Bailey, Renee Geck, and Tywin Lowe. So it's a big group, like 16 of us. And I'm going to let Bryce take it over now as one of the three lead organizers of today's event.
Hey, nice to see you all. Great to see such a good turnout for today. I was one of the co-organizers of this event with Cindy Voisin and Tywin Lowe. I'm an assistant professor at Loras College, which is a PUI, primarily undergrad institution. So we at Brewmore, we're always looking for ways to build community and get people thinking about projects. So I'm hoping that this grants-themed microbrew is going to be a good opportunity for everyone to think about their next grant and how to go about applying for it. So we've got a few great speakers lined up. I want to post the schedule in the chat. So we'll start out with a couple keynote presentations from folk who work at NSF and NIH. We'll have a grantees panel where people can talk about their experience applying for and getting grants. And then at the end, we've got a few action items. We're going to try to organize some grant writing groups. So if you need a little extra kick or some encouragement along the way in writing your grant, we can try to pair you up with someone with a similar topic interest, so you can give each other feedback and encouragement. And we're also going to send out a crowdsourced list of grants so we can all add opportunities as we find them. After everything, we're going to do a Zoom happy hour. So if you want to hang out, if you see an old colleague in here that you want to catch up with, we'll open some breakout rooms. You can hop into those for smaller conversations. And yeah, hopefully you'll also meet some new people today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Cindy to introduce our first speaker.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cindy Voisin, and I'm a professor at Northeastern Illinois University, which is a minority serving institution in Chicago. And it gives me great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Mary Crowe. She's a program officer within the Division of Undergraduate Education at NSF. And before starting this position in 2020, Dr. Crowe worked in higher education for over 30 years. She was a professor of biology and the associate provost of experiential learning at Florida Southern College. In addition, Dr. Crowe served as the director of campus-wide offices of undergraduate research at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and Xavier University of Louisiana. Prior to taking on administrative roles, Dr. Crowe was a faculty member who taught, advised, and mentored undergraduate students in her research on the behavior of burrowing animals. So we would like to thank you again for accepting our invitation to present today. And there will be a Q&A after Dr. Crowe's presentation. So we ask that you post your questions in the chat for discussion following her presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Crowe.
Thanks, Cindy, and everybody at microBREW. I'm super excited to be here. And I am thrilled to be talking with an audience such like you all have brought together. So I'm going to get started, and I go quickly. I talk fast, and I'm hoping that I'm able to answer any and all questions that you might have. And I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I think that's what I want to share. And now I need to start my slideshow from the beginning. So hi, like Cindy said, I'm Mary Crowe. I'm with the National Science Foundation. I'm a rotating program officer within the Division of Undergraduate Education. And I'm actually happy to answer questions about what it means to be a rotator. All that being said, I know you're here today because you're interested in finding out about some of the funding programs we have within the Division of Undergraduate Education. And so the Division of Undergraduate Education we're doers. The overarching goal of us is to strengthen STEM education at 2- and 4-year colleges. And we do this in a variety of ways by improving the curriculum, the instruction, the climate of the classroom, advising, you name it. That's what we're interested in doing, is improving things so that our students and you succeed and succeed well in terms of STEM. Before many of you got on the phone call, we were talking a little bit about how program officers are here to help you. And so I have this slide right here with a whole bunch of NSF abbreviations on it, because I'm hopeful that instead of you going, oh my God, what is FUSE and what is BICSR, and not understanding all that, that you will actually reach out to me. My email is mcrowe@nsf.gov, and I'll post it up in the chat when I'm done talking, to reach out. And as program officers, we're here to help you. So there are 4 major programs within the Division of Undergraduate Education: the Advanced Technological Education, Improving Undergraduate Science Education, Scholarships for STEM Students, and the Robert Noyce Teacher Scholarship Program. All the other programs that the DUE program runs are listed on the right-hand side of the slide. And when I say that some of them have big budgets, some of them have small budgets, but the meat of our program are the first 4 that I mentioned. And I'm going to briefly talk about what the goals are of each of those 4 programs, and then talk about 2 programs that came up when you guys posted, what is it that you wanted to learn more about? So just to give you information about the Advanced Technological ATE program, it's about 2-year institutions of higher education, so community and technical colleges. It also supports partnerships between community and technical colleges and high schools and other academic institutions to improve entry-level kind of workforce technician training. So the ATE program supports curriculum development. It supports professional development of faculty members so that they can implement industry-based certificate programs and help students transition directly from community and technical colleges into the workforce. I am on the ATE program. I know lots about it. If you've got any questions, this is one program I've been involved in the past 3 years. The IUSE program, Improving Undergraduate Science Education, is not solely focused on 2-year and technical colleges. 2-year and technical colleges, if you're a faculty member at an institution like that, you can apply to ATE, but you can also apply to the IUSE program. And the IUSE program has 2 tracks. It's called Engaged Student Learning and the Institutional and Community Transformation. So you can think of these 2 tracks. The first track, Engaged Student Learning, is about if you were interested in implementing a pedagogy in your classroom, whether it's a brand new pedagogy, whether it's an established pedagogy that you want to adapt and adopt into your classroom, and you're going to measure the impact on students, you would apply through the Engaged Student Learning track. If, however, you were interested in helping your colleagues, like those of you who are on the phone or on the Zoom call today, implement a pedagogy of some sort, or advising, or some sort of text messages to encourage students, and you did the professional training for the faculty and staff, that would be an institutional and a community transformation project. And so the difference between those two, the funding levels are kind of the same, the deadlines are the same, how long we support you are the same. The big thing is the institutional and community transformation requires that you talk about a theory of change and how the work that you're going to do is going to follow that theory of change. So it's two of the big programs we have within DUE. The second two programs that we have in the Division of Undergraduate Education are scholarship programs, or programs that directly support students. So we have a program that's called the STEM program. And in a nutshell, what this is interested in is increasing the number of domestic, low income, but academically talented students so that they succeed in STEM. And so we provide scholarships directly. You and your institution apply for a grant, and you can give students up to $15,000 a year in scholarships. So it's all about making sure that you don't give them more money than they financially are qualified for, but you can give them scholarships. Just as important to the STEM program are the support structures that you're going to develop and put in place to improve the outcomes of all of your students. So there will be some students who benefit from the scholarships and the support wraparound services, but a whole bunch of more students are also going to benefit from those wraparound supports as well. The NOISE program is a teacher scholarship program. And this program specifically is focused on students that are interested in entering the workforce as a teacher. And so we have 4 different tracks within the NOISE program. We provide scholarships and stipends, NSF teaching fellowships. We do research related to STEM teaching effectiveness and K through 12. And we also now offer master teaching fellowships through the NOISE program. Out of the 4 programs that I'm mentioning right now, this is the one that I know the least amount about because I've not directly worked in the NOISE program. I have worked in STEM, and I work also in the IU's program. So one of the things that you guys mentioned is, how do you know what to apply for with respect to a grant? And it can be confusing, truth be told, because all of our programs, the IUs, the HSI, which is the Hispanic Serving Institutions, and the ATE program, all support improving undergraduate education for STEM students. So which one do you apply to? It depends on what it is you're interested in doing. The same thing for the NOISE and the STEM. Part of it is getting an understanding of what the different programs support. So this is where I come into play, and this is where all the other program officers come into play to help you understand what program you might be interested in, or if you have an idea and you have no idea what program to apply to. Right? Read the solicitation or the overview of the solicitation. Contact me or other program officers within DUE with questions. You don't have to have a one-pager ready to go. You can just say, I have questions. I don't understand this. Can you help me? This is why we're here. One of the things that we often encourage potential PIs to do is to write a one-pager and send it our way. And then we can help you find the best fit for what it is you're proposing to do with your idea. You can also arrange for a one-on-one Zoom call or phone call with me or other program officers to give you some feedback on your one-pager, or to help you understand what program to apply to. One of the most beneficial things you can do is to sign up to be a reviewer for one of our programs. And I don't have the links of those handy, the little surveys that we have, but if you shoot me an email, I can give you those links. It helps you understand what the different programs look for and great proposals. One of the most important things that we encourage you to do is to look at the most current version of the solicitation. So I mentioned the ATE, the IUSE, the NOIS, and the STEM programs. These are the current solicitation numbers, and you're going to get a copy of these slides. So you can just Google NSF 22. It's actually 23-572. I take that back. That one's been updated. Luckily, NSF is much better at, if you type in the older solicitation, it will direct you to the most current solicitation. It didn't used to do that, now it does. It's really important that you are looking at the most current version of the solicitation because things change. So for example, the HSI program, if you're at a Hispanic serving institution, that program used to require an institutional data narrative as a completely separate document. And you could take up to 5 or 6 pages to talk about the data related to student enrollment and success in your programs. And in the newest solicitation, we've changed that. And your institutional data narrative now needs to be part of that 15-page project summary. That's a huge change. And that affects how you're going to approach writing your proposal. The STEM program, the newest solicitation, which is 23-572, we've increased the scholarship level from $10,000 to $15,000. So always make sure you're looking at the most current solicitation. I'm going to now talk really briefly about 2 programs that I thought you might be interested in based on what the comments I saw about what you wanted to get out of your attendance at microBREW today. One is a program that we have in DUE that we call BICSR. We call it BICSR. You guys probably will call it Building Capacity in STEM Education Research, but we have a nice acronym. And there are 2 kind of tracks within BICSR. One is if you have your degree in the sciences and you want to do STEM education research, but you have no idea what to do, how to do it, but you want formal training, you can put in a proposal so that you can learn how to carry out educational researchers. So you can learn how to design instruments, validate those instruments, determine whether or not they're reliable or not. And so that's one track. There's another track that is related to supporting institutes that provide training and support for you to develop things along with your peers. So an example of this is course-based undergraduate research. Many of you probably involve students in course-based undergraduate research. And now we're hearing about VIPs, vertically integrated projects, where students might take the results of something they did in an intro bio course and bring it to an organic or an inorganic chemistry course or to microbiology. Well, how can you track student learning between there? What instruments are available? That's another track that can help you put together an instrument and validate it and get it out to the greater community to measure student learning on those VIPs. A second program, the RCNUBE, stands for Research Coordination Networks in Undergraduate Biology Education. And I believe microBREW is funded through that, or has some of the members within microBREW have been funded through the RCNUBE. And in a nutshell, the RCNUBE is about bringing together individuals who want to form a community or a network to improve undergraduate science education for biology students around a given theme. So there are many different types of networks. We have incubator networks. 1 year, that proposal is 8 pages long. It's for 1 year. It's for $75,000. It's to bring individuals together for initial conversations. And then the full RCNUBE, you can request funds for up to $500,000. So know that we have those available to you. One of the things, when and if you decide you are going to put a proposal into NSF, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of advice. One is to make sure that whatever you say in your project summary is phrased in the same way as it is in your project description, in your budget justification, and any other solicitation specific documents. For example, I can't tell you how many times reviewers will say, the project description said these are the goals of the project, but the project summary say they're the objectives. And so And in some cases, people will say we're going to pay students a stipend, and then the reviewers go to the budget justifications, and then it talks about paying students an hourly wage. And so then what ends up happening is then reviewers start to really question whether or not you've thought your project through, because there's a mismatch of how you're referring to things. The other kind of big downfall that I have seen over the past 3 years, and this happens more than I can tell you, this is probably the thing that dooms the proposals, is more important that you do some things or a few things really, really well versus proposing to do too many things without a lot of details or trying to be too ambitious. That will kill a proposal. Even if you add, if 90% of your proposal is great, and then at the very end you think, oh, well, then we're going to expand this to this, but you don't provide any details, the reviewers are going to go, oh, this was great, but we had questions about this, and then the ranking of your proposal goes down. I'm going to answer any questions that you might have, and thank you for your time. I know you're going to hear from a lot of people, so I'm going to stop my share. These slides are going to be available to you, and I am going to go to the chat somewhere.
I can help
put
with
in
that, Mary. I can help.
Yeah, I'm going to put in my email address in the chat for anybody who wants to shoot me an email. So with that, I'm going to stop and answer questions that people might have, and I'm going to trust that you guys are going to cut me off when it's time to move on to NIH.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And we do have some questions posted in the chat. So the first one is, the question is, how are the different levels in the USE tracks determined? Is it the size of the student body, for example?
No, so that's a really great question. The IU's proposals, the way that you determine what track you go to is dependent on, I guess, the level. Are you piloting something out? Are you trying something out? Are you doing something at one institution versus two institutions? Are you doing something within one classroom or a whole department? Those are the ways in which we kind of determine, you would determine which level you apply to for the IU's program.
Okay, thank you. The next question is STEM fellowships only for graduate students, or can needy URM undergraduates apply?
So the STEM programs, the funding goes to the institution, so it doesn't go directly to students. And the STEM program, you can actually request scholarship support for undergraduate and graduate students. So the $15,000 in scholarship support is for undergraduate students. You can actually write a STEM program or grant to support graduate students, and the stipends for graduate students are up to $30,000. So if you're at an institution that has a small master's program and you want to attract awesome, fantastic students to your program, you could write a STEM proposal so that you could help support those students. And again, the STEM program is all about supporting individuals who have financial need but have academic talent. And so it's going to be up to you to define how you determine that they have academic talent. We do require that you work with your financial aid office so that there's a document that they will submit to your proposal that documents what the average unmet need is at your institution.
The next question is for ATE. Can the grant be administered by a four-year institution in collaboration with a community college, or does the grant need to be housed at a two-year institution or an institution that offers an associate's degree?
The grant does not have to be housed at a community college or a two-year institution. It can come from a four-year institution, but you better be sure that in your narrative and all the supporting documents, you recognize, you celebrate, and you make sure that the two-year and technical colleges are equal partners or better partners for you. We know that sometimes community and technical colleges don't have the grant infrastructure in place to help manage grants. And so a four-year institution can help. The ATE program, though, does require that faculty members are PIs or co-PIs on the ATE grants. But you want to make sure clearly that there's a collaborative relationship between you and the community and technical colleges, and that it's not we're providing to you over here. There are a lot of things to be learned and a lot of things to value from community and technical colleges, and they actually bring in more STEM students than our four-year institutions do. And so we need to support them in the best possible way.
Okay, thank you. There's another question posted in the chat about the requirements to sign up to be a reviewer and whether you have to be a grantee before or previously. There was the link was provided by another participant as to the information on the website, but would you like to elaborate at all on what you look for in reviewers?
So just so you know, I gave you guys my email, contact me, because we look for reviewers. There's not just one place to, unfortunately, there's not just one place to sign up to be a reviewer at NSF. We have a spreadsheet and a link for the Hispanic serving institutions. We have a completely different spreadsheet for the Excellent program and another one for IUs. So no, you can reach out to me and I can get you the links to all of the programs. For DUE, you do not have to have previous NSF funding to sit on a panel. Actually, the way I think Cindy mentioned, been at this for more than 30 years. I was really fortunate. Somebody on my dissertation committee was a rotating program officer at NSF. And my first job was at a primarily undergraduate institution. And he needed somebody with my background on a panel. So the very first year I was a faculty member, I went to NSF and sat on a panel, and that transformed my whole entire career. And so again, please feel free to volunteer. You don't get paid a lot. The time commitment is kind of huge, but you learn so much from being a panelist.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the rotating program officer position?
Sure. So right now I'm in my third year of a 3-year rotation at NSF. About a third of the program officers at NSF are rotators. And what that means is I am still employed by my home institution, which is a small private college here in Florida. What NSF does is NSF writes a grant to my home institution that covers my salary and my benefits, and I retain my tenure and all that other kind of stuff, my office, all that stuff at my home institution. But for the past 3 years, instead of doing work in the classroom and with my colleagues on my home institution, I've been doing the work of NSF. And we have open positions. Right now, we're already interviewing people, but we bring folks on. Most of our new rotators, so like I rotate out this summer, most of our rotators will rotate in either in August or in January. And so there is a link, and I can share it. If you send me an email, I can give you the link where you can fill out an application and just put your application in for the pool for the next round coming up.
Okay, and another question we have is on the IUSE Engage Student Learning track. Do you fund small projects, such as a project focusing on a course offered once per year?
Sure. What you need to do is make sure that your budget matches what it is you're doing. So if you're going to offer a course once a year, and you put in for a $500,000 IU's proposal, I think that would raise somebody's eyebrows. Why do you need this much money to revise a course that you only teach once per year and maybe for less than 100 students? There will also be questions as to why you're not getting institutional support. And so in your project description, you can talk about the types of things you want to do that are completely out of the scope for your institution and why it is you need NSF support to do the work that you're asking for. For sure, absolutely. Yeah, and the thing is the amounts that I showed on the IUs and for any of our programs, you never have to ask for the full amount. So you could put in a proposal for $15,000 or $20,000.
Mm-hmm. And we have one more follow-up question about rotating officers. Do rotating officers work mostly from DC, or is it mostly remote?
So right now, I'm still remote. I go to DC 1 week out of every month. They are changing. Well, right now, program officers are required to be in at NSF 4 days out of every 2 days out of every pay period, so 4 days out of every month. Whether or not that changes over time, I'm not sure. But at this point in time, most of the staff at NSF is still teleworking. All of our panels are still, most of our panels, 99% of our panels are still virtual.
The next question is, what level of institutional support is required for a successful proposal?
While NSF does not require, nor can an institution provide any match to any of our grants. And so the answer there, I guess, is 0. There is a document that goes into every grant proposal called Facilities, Equipment, and Other Resources in Support of a Project. And you can talk about the support that might be in place. So for example, the STEM program, sometimes many of those projects come in and they're not only supporting students with scholarships, but they're also helping to prepare them for careers. And so that document will talk about how career services will be involved in that project as part of the normal duties of the career services department and the ways in which they're going to mentor students and help students with cover letters. So I think the bottom line answer is there can be no matching from a given institution for any grant that you put into NSF.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what funding mechanisms would you recommend for an organization like ours, like Brew More?
Well, the RCN UBEs are one. The iUse program is probably another really good example of a program that you can get funding through. And then there's also just the RCN. So there's research coordination networks that aren't RCN UBEs, that are just RCN RCNs. And so if you are involving geologists or mathematicians and you have an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary network, you can apply through just the RCN mechanism to get funding to help you host workshops and bring people together around a given theme.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so with that, we'll stay on time and we will end our Q&A. So thank you very much, Mary, for your presentation today. And now I will hand the baton over to Josie to introduce our next keynote speaker.
Hello, thank you, Mary. That was really informative. So our next speaker is going to be Beck Burgess from the NIH. She is the perfect person to speak to us today because she has lots of experience with federal funding from both the applicant side and the review side. Beck is a New York State native, and she got her undergraduate degree from Cornell University, and that's where she was first introduced to yeast genetics in the lab of Thomas Fox. And it was as an undergrad that she also got her first NIH fellowship. Fun fact is that she spent a college summer at NIH as an intern pouring huge acrylamide sequencing gels for her department there. After graduating college, she pursued her doctoral studies at Columbia in Rodney Rothstein's lab, studying double-strand break repair in yeast. And she continued with NIH support, having an F31 NRSA as a grad student. And then for her postdoc, she moved back to NIH to join Tom Mistelli's lab, where she continued to study double-strand break repair, and she made some important discoveries there about how chromatin is reorganized in response to double-strand breaks. After her postdoc, she started her own lab at Stevenson University in Baltimore, where she continued to investigate how chromatin environment affects double-strand break repair in budding yeast. And at Stevenson, she was involved in several national cure consortia, including the Genomics Education Partnership, Build a Genome, Cubes, and MIRIC. And she also developed her own spectacular cure in which her students used CRISPR to investigate how forcing double-strand breaks in particular genomic regions with well-characterized chromatin structures would resolve. And she was awarded an NSF Career Award for this project. So finally, she returned home to NIH, back to the mothership in 2021 to become a scientific review officer, in which she coordinates review of R15s and other applications that she's going to discuss today. I just want to mention that I've known Beck for a long time, and outside of science, she's also passionate about her many pets and her music. Her current musical project is a synth band called Hand Apple. It's available on Bandcamp, so check them out at handapple.bandcamp.com. And Beck is not only an amazing scientist, she's also one of the best people you'll ever meet. So we're really fortunate and privileged to have her with us today. And if you have a chance to introduce yourself to her afterwards, I highly recommend it.
Wow, thank you, Josie. That was a spectacular introduction. So yeah, I'm going to share my screen. So yeah, I'm on the scientific review side of things. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the review side of things. But I also want to be a resource for you. So I've heard NIH is hard to navigate. So even though I'm a review officer, I'm happy to point you toward program officers and get you in touch with the right folks. I know I had trouble getting in touch with people a lot because it's hard to navigate, hard to know who to get in touch with. So yeah, today I'm going to talk a bit about how to navigate some NIH resources, find opportunities, who to contact, and yeah, you can always start with me, and then I'll focus on R15s a bit, which are a really important mechanism. So as you probably know, your application could be funded by any one of 24 NIH institutes or centers that are funding ICOs. You might find your favorite institute here, but there are some non-funding ICOs. Center for Scientific Review is where I am located. And the Center for Scientific Review is basically the central receipt point for all grant applications. So this is where applications come in and an institute or center gets assigned for potential funding. And then the CSR also assigns the application to a scientific review group, either in CSR or at an institute. As you can see from this graph here is CSR, Center for Scientific Review, does about 76% of the review at NIH. So we do the lion's share of the review. So CSR has 240 chartered study sections and some regularly recurring special emphasis panels that review things like your typical R grants, fellowship applications, also the R15 award, which I'll talk about in more detail, things like small business awards as well. Another really common and important grant mechanism that you all might be interested in is the R25, which is a curriculum development grant mechanism. Those actually tend to go, they do go to the funding institute, not to CSR for review. Of course, we have lots of reviewers that help us out with this. So just to give you an idea of the timeline of a review and funding for NIH grant applications, I'll always just say start early because it takes a long time for everything to process. 2 weeks for the Center for Scientific Review to determine which institute and review group this is going to. And then the actual scientific review, that's where I'm involved, the level 1 review. This takes just about 2 months, just over 2 months to occur. And then there's level 2 review, which we call program. So that's the institute or center determines whether they're going to recommend it for funding based on the level 1 scientific merit review, their programmatic priorities and other administrative considerations. And that takes somewhere in the realm of like 4 months or so. So there are a couple of main overlapping cycles per year for things like the R15 that have multiple due dates. Many what we call parent announcements, that's R15s, R01s all have parent announcements, and those they usually have 3 due dates per year. So the R15 is given as an example here. So R15 has a February 25th submission date, and receipt and referral occurs after that. Then review occurs, and then the Institute Council review, and then the award doesn't happen until about 10 months later from that February 25th deadline. And so there are 2 other overlapping deadlines, or sorry, overlapping cycles per year. So yeah, start early if you want to get in on the cycle. So think about when the award would actually occur. So I want to talk a bit about the application process. So how to prepare and how to find opportunities. So start with registering with grants.gov and ERA Commons. Do that like a year ahead of any deadlines or even more. And so get on there, and then after that, you could find an FOA, so a funding opportunity announcement, using the NIH Guide to Grants and Contracts, which I have on the next slide. So lots of clickable links in this presentation. The PDF will be available to you, so you can go and check things out. Everything that is a funding opportunity at NIH will be in the NIH Guide to Grants and Contracts. So here I just did a search for R25s. This is a screenshot, and you can see that there's lots of different R25s available. Some of them their issuing organizations can be very different, and they're all very specific. So short courses on innovative methodologies and approaches in behavioral and social sciences, or genome research to attract talented undergraduates, but also there's genomic curriculum for medical students. So it's all very specific. So whatever your idea is, look around on the Guide to Grants and Contracts and try to find something specific to your area of interest. And then once you find a funding opportunity, read that FOA, sketch out some aims, and you can also look at NIH Reporter, which is a really great resource to find out what other similar projects, where have they been funded, who was their program officer, what study section did they go to. You can find out all sorts of things from NIH Reporter, and reach out to a program officer. And if you don't know who to reach out to, they should be listed in the FOA, the funding opportunity announcement, but you can always get in touch with me and I can help you navigate these resources as well. I did want to point out some other NIGMS programs of interest. So NIGMS, the National Institute for General Medical Sciences, has a division for research capacity building and have a lot of really great opportunities. The SHORE, which is kind of like the R15, which I'll talk about later, but for institutions with large populations of underserved students. You've probably heard of COBRA and INBRE P20s, the SCORE program. All of this is within NIGMS, and here are some clickable links for you to check those out. And also the research training, workforce development, and the diversity division is also great. So they have a lot of things that would be of interest to folks here. So once you find your opportunity, you'll have to prepare an application and then submit, track, and view. So I'm going to talk a bit about how to prepare your application in a bit, but I wanted to talk about sort of the tracking and what are the common issues with grant submissions. I do want to point out down here that there's this Insider's Guide to Peer Review for Applicants. So this has got some great insights on producing a highly competitive NIH application. So yeah, next slide. So ERA Commons, that's where you can track your application. You can check your grant application for errors. It's really important to check that everything worked out all right. And I'll talk about that more in a second. You can track your review assignment, look at the review outcome, find contact info for your PO. And even if you weren't successful that round, your PO can always help you retool a grant, find other opportunities, et cetera. So really work closely with your program officer. It's important to be on ERA Commons to ensure any early stage investigator eligibility is in place. I'll talk about that too in a bit. And yeah, so there's lots that you can do on ERA Commons. So this is what it looks like. You can click review and it'll show you when you're being reviewed and in what scientific review group. So scientific review groups are also called standing study sections. Okay, so some of the most common grant submission problems: submitting late. Be really aware of your grant deadlines. Aim to submit early because there's a 2-day viewing window and it does not extend the deadline. So early submission allows you time to fix any problems and omissions. So you really need to double check that everything uploaded properly. Late applications are sometimes accepted, so good reasoning behind it. So do familiarize yourself with the late submission policy. Always follow the instructions really closely. And even if a colleague says that they did something outside of the instructions without incident, always follow the instructions. And do keep in mind that you should always know which institutes or centers participate in a particular funding announcement. So it's important that your science fits with the ICs that are participating. So there might be some really great capacity building grant, but you need to make sure that the science also fits. Okay, so this the CSR's division of receipt and referral are the ones that basically determine that everything's on time, formatted correctly, complete and compliant. You can always get in touch with them by emailing them if you have questions during the submission phase. Your what is it called? Institutional organize your AOR, so your authorized organizational representative, sorry, is the person who should be submitting this for you. And they can reach out to DRR, but also you can as well. So DRR is also the folks that basically assign your institute or center for the funding consideration and the review group. So NIH does have this really kind of weird two-level review where scientific review happens first and then the institute determines whether they're going to consider it for funding. So they're separate levels of review. So for instance, my scientific review group, I have lots of applications from NIGMS, and also from NIAID. So it doesn't matter, like the scientific review group and the institute are somewhat separate. So you can suggest which scientific review group your application is going to go to. You can suggest assignments. You can also suggest institute. So not only just study section, but also institute. This is where you also identify your potential conflicts of interest, list areas of expertise needed to evaluate the application. Do not request reviewers, but do list areas of expertise needed. And yes, speak freely in this form is not given to the reviewers. So it's generally not made available to them. This is for DRR and SROs like me only to help determine what we need to do to get this reviewed fairly. So you might be like, well, what study section would I suggest? I don't even know where to start. CSR, the CSR website has this thing called the assisted referral tool, and you can actually just paste in all of your specific aims and it'll pop out a bunch of matches for study section based on that text. So you can use that. You can also browse for study section, which study section CSR has. You can also use NIH Reporter, like I mentioned before. And the notes of my slides also have a lot of links in them too. So check that out if you're interested in finding more links, like NIH Reporter. So once you have a study section for your grant application, the study section is made up of a scientific review officer, that's my job, and also reviewers. So this SRO is the person who recruits reviewers and assigns applications. They manage the conflicts of interest. They write up the summary statements. So they write the summary of discussion of each application that's discussed, and it provides information to institutes and centers for the second level of review. Reviewers are obviously recruited. Standing study sections have 12 to 22 regular members. These are chartered members of the panel who have 4-year terms plus temporary reviewers. Special emphasis panels can be much smaller. They can be 12 members total. One person's a chair and works closely with the SRO to manage the discussion. And in a regular standing study section, about 70 to 100 applications are reviewed in 1 to 2 day meetings, but special emphasis panels can be smaller or shorter, and they typically are. Before the study section meeting, each application gets assigned to 3 or 4 reviewers 5 to 6 weeks in advance, and these reviewers will assess your application by providing a preliminary overall impact score, criterion scores for each of the 5 core review criteria, which I'll tell you about in a second. They comment on the appropriateness of the budget, but that's not considered at all in scoring, and they give a written critique of the application. At the meeting, the top half of applications will be discussed. So the top scoring applications based on preliminary overall impact scores get discussed at the meeting, but anything from the lower half, the and they have to be unanimously judged by the review committee to be in the lower half and not discussed. So what we call rescue, any one reviewer can rescue an application for discussion if they deem it of high scientific merit. Review is done in clusters, so in standing study sections where R01s, R21s, R03s, a bunch of different types of research grants are being reviewed. They are clustered together, and that 50% cutoff is only applied to that cluster of applications. So for instance, R15s, the top half of R15s will be discussed. They are not clustered with R01s. And same thing with new investigator R01s get clustered separately as well, so that they get their own 50% cutoff score to ensure that they're not competing with established investigator R01s for review discussion. The applications to be discussed are reviewed with a random order within each cluster to ensure that this is reducing bias that could be caused by discussing applications in descending or ascending order of scores. And then after the meeting, every application gets a summary statement, which contains the scores for, so basically it gets you get your impact score or your priority score, which is essentially every person on the panel except those in conflict will cast a final score on each application. And those are, that's what your priority score is. They're multiplied by 10 to give the final score. They were given a percentile if that type of application is percentiled. Things like R15s are not percentiled. And there's any administrative notes if necessary also in there. Underneath this is the cover page. There's also scores for individual review criteria, which I'll talk about which those criteria are in a second. Critiques from the assigned reviewer, so the written critiques as well. So all applications get this. If your application is discussed, you get that overall impact score. If it's not discussed, it's just listed as ND. And if it's also discussed, you get a summary of discussion written up by the SRO, which describes what was said at the meeting about the application. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit more about the R15 mechanism. These are a really common way to fund student-driven research projects, whether they're course-based research, apprentice-based research, some blend of the two. And there are two types: the area, which is for undergraduate research, and the REAP, which is graduate and professional school. So for graduate and professional schools. So the FOA links are all in the notes for you. So the program goals of the R15 is to provide support for meritorious research at schools, either undergraduate focused institutions for area or graduate or health professional schools for the REAP program. The second goal is to strengthen the research environment at these institutions. These institutions must not have been major recipients of NIH funding. That's a large eligibility requirement. And also to give students an opportunity to gain significant research experience. And again, their student research can be mentored or course-based. The goal is not necessarily to get folks to acquire R01 funding in the future. It is, these are the main goals of the R15 program. So R15s and R01s are both research grants, but there are definitely some differences. The overall impact of an R01, we're looking for a sustained, powerful influence on the research field involved. Whereas with an R15, we're looking for overall impact of that this is a publishable, disseminated, and important contribution to the field. It doesn't have to be this sustained, powerful influence. And the scope could be limited due to limitations on facilities and personnel. Publications could be less impactful, though some recent analysis by NIH shows that dollar by dollar R15 publications get as many citations as R01 publications. R15s are very different in that they must describe research opportunities for students very clearly in the application, and also must describe how the award will strengthen the research environment. So basically a solid and interesting scientific research project that's not by its nature innovative or paradigm shifting and includes a good plan for engaging students could be a great area or REAP. So the eligibility, so this is to be eligible, the institutions must award baccalaureate science degrees or baccalaureate or advanced degrees in health professions and biomedical or behavioral sciences, and must not have received no more than $6 million per year in last 4 of 7 years. The provost must submit a letter stating this eligibility. So that's really important that the provost letter is in the application. In terms of review, so what are the reviewers looking for? They score based on 5 scored review criteria. They're looking for significance. So significance is basically, should this project be done? It's lasting impact. It's in terms of the science, it's does this project address an important problem or barrier? And is there rigorous key support for this? But also in terms of the other 2 major goals of the R15, will the students be exposed to research and will it strengthen the environment? So significance is very important. You know, should this work be done? Is it important? The other ones are more, can this project be done? It's more of a feasibility thing. So basically the investigator approach and environment are describing, you know, how will this be done? And the reviewers are looking at, they're judging on, can this be done? Is it feasible? So for the approach, potential problems, pitfalls, alternative strategies should always be described. Feasibility should be established and it should be clearly rigorous, you know, looking at things in a robust and unbiased way. I'll talk a bit more about investigator next, actually. And so these 5 scored review criteria all will lead to the overall impact. These all are important for the overall impact. So each of these are scored from 1 to 9, 1 being the best and 9 being the worst. And not all the review criteria are given equal weight. So the reviewers sort of might think the significance is so important that that some approach weaknesses, they're weighing that less and still giving a really good overall impact. So investigator, so not only are they looking for what it said on the previous slide, are the investigators well suited to the project? For the R15, this includes experience in supervising students and in addition to the appropriate scientific training. And I did want to point out that your career stage is considered in scientific review. If it's an R01, you get a separate cluster if you're a new investigator or early stage investigator. Reviewers are also encouraged to weigh potential overachievement and reduce their expectations for preliminary data and publications. But it's only considered if NIH has that correct information. So make sure that's correct in ERA. Career stage is a larger factor in the 2nd level of review by institutes and centers. Early stage investigator applications with meritorious scores get prioritized for funding. And ICs generally will fund new investigators according to the IC's programmatic and strategic interests. Environment, so this is generally in the facilities and other resources section primarily. Here you should really address the availability of well-qualified students to participate. I put a little asterisk just because area, we're talking undergrads. Only undergrads, and for the REAP program, that's health professional, undergraduate, and or graduate students. It can be any combination of those. I do want to note postdocs, clinical fellows, postbacks, high schoolers do not fulfill the goal to expose students to research. There should be plans to recruit well-qualified students from diverse backgrounds, and there should be evidence of student pursuit of biomedical science careers. So do they go on to PT school, PA school? Do they go into industry? Do they go to graduate school? So some evidence there that can also be in the biosketch. That doesn't have to be in facilities and other resources. It can be found in different places. And also it's important that the PI demonstrates that they have sufficient time and support to conduct the work. How students should be involved is so important. Students should be involved in most or all aspects of the project. Participation in experiments, collection, analyzing data, execution and troubleshooting, participation in meetings, discussion of future directions, etc. It's also highly desirable to include students in presentations at meetings, local, national meetings, publications, etc. And the research team must be composed primarily of students. Again, the asterisk is just to remind you area and REAP have different student body populations that they're talking about. So students should be very meaningfully involved, and that's a common criticism of R15s is if they're not really clear on how the students are going to be involved. It needs to be significant, meaningful, and really clearly addressed. Collaborators are allowed, so people who are not in R15 eligible institutions, but you have to really be mindful of the R15 goals. So the majority of research should be done by the PI at the grantee institution, but collaborators can add expertise and opportunities for students. So if you have somebody who's doing structural work on your favorite protein, and the students are going to learn about different structural biology and they're going to be involved in that, that can be great. It can add expertise, but it can't look like you're just outsourcing work to an R1 institution. So preparing an application, I'm not going to go through all this. This is a lot. I just threw this in because I thought it would be important to just think about what the good practices are and common problems. And one of the biggest common problems is unclear student recruitment or insufficient plans for engagement of students. So this is sort of common things that we see in good applications and applications that maybe have too many weaknesses. The budget, not particularly restrictive for R15s, can be used for a really wide range of expenses like publication costs, travel, collaborators, student salaries. So reminder that students must be compensated for their participation. And course credit compensation is permitted, but it must be really well justified. So I'm just going to click ahead. There's a lot of helpful websites on these slides who can answer your questions before you submit your application. You can get in touch with a PO. You can use NIH Matchmaker, which is part of, this was supposed to be a link, but it's part of NIH Reporter. It's like on the first page. Get in touch with a program officer who is in your field. And even if they're not the right person, they can usually guide you to the right person. I can help you out. I'm a scientific review officer. And the CSR division of receipt and referral can also help you out. So yeah, get in touch with people, talk to NIH folks. That's what we're here for. And I know it can be hard to navigate, but people at NIH can definitely help you out. Lots of sources here for you. I just put in a bunch of links for you all to, you can watch mock study section videos, click on CSR information about resources for applicants, etc. But I did want to end with this slide to remind you that we have an early career reviewer program. So you can sit in on a study section when you first start out. So you can apply for the ECR program here. There are some limitations, but it's a great program. But you could also volunteer to be a reviewer even if you're outside the ECR program. Get in touch with folks and they're happy to look into it. So thank you. Hopefully I didn't run too over. I'll stop sharing so I can see you all. All right, so I guess I'm reading the question, or no, we don't have any time for questions, I see. Oh, should I take questions now or wait until later?
Josie and Cindy, do you guys want to do the question moderation, or we don't have a ton of questions?
I'm happy to lead the discussion. So the first question that we have is, how long are ERA common applications saved? What if you left the institution you were at the time that you submitted?
I can't say. I don't really know that. I'm not really on the side of ERA Commons. So I don't know. I'm sorry. Don't have a good answer for you.
That's okay. We'll try the next one. Okay. So this is a question actually for both presenters, and we can continue this discussion during our panel discussion also. How much institutional infrastructure, so your grants office, does an applicant need to submit their final application? I'm thinking this might be important for faculty at smaller institutions to consider.
Yeah. So you will need some, an AOR to submit for you. So some sort of representative. And I mean, from my personal experience, not all small institutions, mine didn't have a huge OSPR office. There are actually grants at NIH to apply. You could apply for funds to help build your Office of Sponsored Programs. So that's something I wanted to point out. But
I'm going to chime in
yeah.
just really briefly. So at my experience at Florida Southern College is we didn't have an AOR. We don't have an office of, I am that person. So you need an individual on your campus who can navigate NSF to sign you up as an institution and to sign people up as viewers and assign roles, and then also have the institutional's ability to submit on your behalf, which means that this person has to be trusted by VP for finance and the president and all that other kind of stuff. But for many small colleges, you don't have to have an Office of Sponsored Research. It can often be somebody that works in your business office. And I'm more than happy to talk to somebody who's at a small institution with no support to help you find individuals people on your campus can connect with to understand what it's like.
Okay, we'll ask just a couple more questions and then we'll take a short break before we start our panel discussion. What determines if your application ends up in a special emphasis panel?
So for R15s in particular, so it just really depends on whether a particular study section is going to get a good quorum of R15s. So they typically want a good number of R15s. If there's just one or two, and there's a number of other ones that are kind of similar within a review branch. So I'm in molecular genetics and genomics, and we have 7 different study sections in there. And so if there's just a couple smattered amongst the 7 study sections, they will cluster them into one special emphasis panel that's just for R15s. So a standalone SEP or special emphasis panel, instead of it just being kind of like a little forgotten piece of a larger study section. So it just depends on numbers often.
Okay, and so since we're going over time into our break, we'll kind of change the schedule a little bit. So we'll take a 5-minute break and then come back at 1:15 for everyone in their time zone and begin our panel discussion. And also there's a lot of really great questions still in the chat. These can be also asked again during the panel discussion, and we hope to answer all of them. And if not, we will keep track of all the questions that are unanswered and reach out to our panelists and our speakers to maybe offer some answers to those. So we're not going to lose sight of the questions that you've asked. And so we'll take our 5-minute break and we'll rejoin at 1:15. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm 1 minute late. All right, so welcome back. My name is Taewa Low, and I'm one of the Brew More steering committee members and one of the organizers of this workshop. And so the next hour or so, we're going to be meeting and having a Q&A with several grantees, so people who have received different types of grants. And so I will just let the panelists introduce themselves. To avoid the awkward Zoom looking to your left, looking to your right confusion, I will just call on people to introduce themselves. Okay, so let's start. I'm just going with the order on my screen. So let's go with Brian McFarland first.
Hi, my name is Brian McFarland. I am currently an Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs at Morningside University in Sioux City. We're a small PUI, like a lot of you. So I'm also a chemist by training. So right now I am a PI on one NSF grant through the IUSE program and a co-PI on another one through the STEM. And now that I'm in the administrative role, I've been doing that for about a year. Part of my job is grants director. So now I'm also helping other people with their grant applications.
Great. Next, how about Jill Keeney? And please correct me if I say your name incorrectly.
No, okay. Nope, that was right. I'm Jill Keeney, and I'm currently at Juniata College. That's the one that often gets pronounced Juanita, but it's Juniata College in central Pennsylvania. We are a small school of about 1,200 students. Again, yeah, so we're a primarily undergraduate institution. We do have some master's programs in biology, education, business. I am a professor of biology. I have been here since 1994. Over the years, I've had a number of different research grants from NSF and NIH R15s, but more recently I've gotten into more program type grants. So I just finished as project director of an RCN, and I am currently project director of an STEM grant. And also in the past, I was a co-director of a cyber infrastructure grant, which we didn't really talk about, but I can, if anybody has questions about that, it provides opportunities for basically just that, getting infrastructure to get your campus wired.
Thank you. Next, Jeannie Chowning.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jeannie Chowning. I just have a few slides I'm going to share, so hang on. So I am an Associate Vice President for Science Education at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle, Washington. And Fred Hutch is a nonprofit research center, and so we are not degree granting, but we partner with the University of Washington for graduate students, and also we have a lot of programs for both students and teachers. And so I'll be kind of able to talk about the outreach components. I've had a number of different NIH and NSF grants, and these are the ones that I currently have as a PI on the Science Education Partnership Award, R25 out of NIH, and I've actually had this 3 times. And I'm going to try for a 4th in July. Also, I have a Youth Enjoy Science. I'm an MPI on that from NCI. And I actually just got a renewal. So somebody asked about renewal, so I could talk about that as well. And also have had NSF, but it's been a little bit more challenging because of the biomedical and health dimensions of the work. So I've had an eye test, Innovative Technology Experiences for Students and Teachers. And also I have tried several times for advancing informal STEM learning. I have not quite succeeded there, but I thought it might be an interesting mechanism for this audience to know about. And then I've also had an SBIR, and that's also an interesting mechanism that you should know about, partnerships between nonprofits and small business. And there's actually quite a big pot of money over there and not so many applicants. And so if there's a small business that your nonprofit might partner with, or your institute might partner with, that might be something to consider. And then, so I'm happy to address any of those particular mechanisms. I've also been on review panels quite a bit, so I can share my kind of like big takeaways from being on a review panel at a later time. But I have a couple ideas about that I'd like to share with you about that.
Great, thank you. And next, Debbie Thurtle-Schmidt.
Hi, my name is Debbie Thurtle-Schmidt, and I'm an assistant professor of biology at Davidson College. And so we are a small, primarily undergraduate institute as liberal arts college in Davidson, North Carolina, with a student body of about 2,000 students, and we're all completely undergraduate. And I currently have, and in the first year of my first NIH R15 grant, I'm a junior faculty. I'm technically in the, I guess, my third or fourth year at Davidson College. So I can also speak to navigating this as a junior faculty member and getting first year kind of first grants in there. And I am primarily interested in genomics and genetics. So I was in that study section. And as well as the other thing that I have done that was mentioned with our NSF panelist is I was one of those people that I have not had an NSF research experience for undergraduate grant. That's from the Division of Biological Infrastructure at NSF, but I have been on a panel to review those before I had it. And that was before I got my grant, which was really influential for me as well.
Thank you. We are supposed to have one more panelist, but they were going to try to slot us in between teaching. And so I don't think they are here yet. So we'll just keep an eye out for Ray Hong. So those are our panelists. I'd like to open it up for questions. Feel free to put your question in the chat, raise your hand. That might be hard with this number of humans, so maybe the chat's better. If you don't want to ask your question publicly in the chat, you can always just direct message it to me, Taewan, in the chat if you want to keep some anonymity, if that's important. Okay. All right, so while people are thinking, maybe I'll just start off with a general question. So writing, oh, there's a question. Okay. Hannah.
Hi, I have a question, mostly about the NSF mechanism. A lot of the goals of these felt very abstract to me. Like I wasn't actually sure what the day-to-day activities of the types of things that would be fulfilling these bigger goals about, let's say the IUCE grants would be one example. Are there places where I can find examples of successful grants to give me a better sense of the concrete things that would be going into these projects?
I think I remember looking in the past on the announcement page, a lot of times they will have links to successful grants that have been funded.
Yeah,
I have to admit I haven't looked lately, but
I think it may well be part of the government requirement for funding, but I believe that all NIH and NSF projects abstracts are published and sort of what the dates of the grant are. One of the speakers had a link, I believe, but you can Google. I Googled a little bit ago and found it for NSF. It's big, so you have to figure out your search terms, but it will give you like here's the grant, here's the dates of the grant, the amount of the grant, and then you can read I think it's mostly just the summary of the grant.
Yeah, I haven't had an NSF grant, but similarly, spending a lot of time on NSF and NIH, the reporter, and where you can see those summaries really helped figure out, okay, what are the kind of like models to follow, even just from the summaries, and then also where does my research best align with the funding agent's priorities?
And I would even go maybe a little bit further. And this was one of my things that I wanted to give as pieces of advice, which was make friends. And so if you look up people who have had funding in a similar mechanism and they're doing something that's interesting or similar, to reach out to them and to, maybe see if they'd be willing to share a copy of their proposal, or if you're writing a proposal, would they be willing to be an advisor on your proposal? And that gets you pretty far. One time I had somebody ask for my proposal through a Freedom of Information Act, And that was not nearly as nice as somebody calling up and saying like, hey, I read about your work. It's really great. Let's talk, and which people have done before. And, I generally share freely as long as people are, responsible with the work. So make friends is one of my tips.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Jan. I've had a number of people email me and say, oh, may we see a copy of your grant? So I have ready to go just the actual project description without everything else, because I usually generally don't send them the budget justification, all that, and certainly not the salary amounts and other things. So I just have that ready to go. If they have questions about the budget, maybe they'll ask. If you're feeling brave and you make such a friend, you could ask them if they would be willing to read through your grant for you, have it ready way ahead of time. That's asking a lot, but you can ask them to do that. I've done that occasionally for people. I'm not going to offer that to 80 people.
Yeah, at that point, if they're making me an advisor on their proposal, then maybe I would.
Yeah. And some institutions will have a little money to pay people. So you might be able to offer that person, hey, my institution said I could pay you like $100 honorarium to read through my grant and give me feedback.
All right. So from the chat, we have a question. So this is from someone from at a PUI, and their question is, with a heavy teaching load, they struggle to find grant writing time. Any tips on how to prioritize your order of operations? Like, if you have 3 ideas but only time to write 1, how do you go about deciding where to go first?
I would recommend, first of all, familiarizing yourself with the common grant programs that you might be looking for funding, and you can get an idea of which one of those 3 might be the most direct fit for a given program, right? So if you have 3 ideas, maybe only 1 or 2 of them actually has sort of a ready-made grant funding program that would actually fit it. Also, if you have any questions about how your program or how your idea might fit with a program, definitely take advantage of the program officers. Mary Crowe, who spoke earlier, she's actually our program officer on the IUs, and she's been very helpful in consulting with us to tell us, what type of ideas, telling us whether our idea would fit with a particular program or not. Beyond that, I think you want to think a lot about feasibility. I think whoever it was that made the point earlier that it's important to take an idea and do a few things on it really, really well instead of trying to do a whole lot of things not as well. So kind of looking at your ideas and thinking, what can I really get a good depth of study and thought here rather than trying to go in a bunch of different directions.
Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. That it's the same as if you've ever done a research grant, right? You have to be careful not to propose to do more than you can do. Another thing that I wanted to that I've observed for those that are maybe, earlier in their career, to find out and think carefully about what's required to actually run the grant. As I said, more recently, I've been doing more of the sort of program grants, and it's a lot more time to run the grant than my research grants were, because I still have my research students, but now in addition, I'm running these programs. And so that's a lot of extra time that takes even more away from what I'm doing. So maybe they're better saved for, a later time. That doesn't mean to say it can't be education grants, but think carefully about how much time you have to actually look at what's required once the program is actually running and what all you have to do, and think about how that fits into your time frame. And that may sort of help you decide which programs you may or may not be ready to apply for.
I can speak to the more practically, how do you do this with our teaching loads? And so, because just from my experience, so I'm also at a teaching college with coming through, so figuring out when and how to find writing is challenging. I was also, so I applied to the October 25th deadline was when I submitted my R15, which in a perfect world, I was aiming actually for the June deadline, but just with teaching teaching and things that just didn't happen. And so my biggest pieces of advice there are a little bit twofold. One of which is take advantage of the summers. Take advantage of the summers, because also in the summers, the other thing you can do if you have the opportunity through other mechanisms, whether, for example, that's mechanisms at your college or not, to support summer funding students, then you can get even just, you don't need much preliminary data, but just to say, look, I have done some of these things with undergraduates and it is feasible with them. That can go a long way, because they are going to be the engine, especially for the R15 area grants that are going to take it there. And then that can also help you in your writing and flushing things out. The other thing, and this is do as I say, not as I do. But one thing that I've been working on in my life in work balance is to block out times in my week that I don't let my grading and my teaching creep in a little bit more, even if it's just an hour here or there, to try to work on the grant and say, you know what, I need to get my summary done today, and get the summary done, or get one part of my specific aims page done, and breaking it down into small manageable tasks and mapping that into how it would work with your teaching was effective for me, because that was especially when I was writing. My son was home all the time with ear infection, so like it was, it's a challenge. But that's why helping with the summer can help.
Yeah, Debbie has some great advice there. And two quick things to follow up on is for the R15s that I had, departmentally, I was able to teach what was in a sort of an upper level cure. And so I was able to have a course that was 12 to 20 students, and the students in the course were doing my research project. That's where I got preliminary data, and I used that for at least 2 R15s. So the preliminary data generated in a research-based class got me the data in order to submit an R15. The other thing is find out if your institution offers junior sabbaticals or similar. There's some institutions that, because they do want faculty to be research active because they know it's good for the students, it's the high impact practices, right? It's the biggest one. And they may support like a semester off to write grants. Not all do, but it's at least worth checking into.
Thank you. Before we move on or discuss this further, our last panelist has arrived, has joined us, and so I just want to give Ray an opportunity to introduce himself to the group before we move forward.
Okay, thanks, Taewing. So sorry about that. I was teaching until now, a lab class, molecular biology. So my name is Ray Hong. I'm at California State University, Northridge, or CSUN. This is my 15th year. So we have a comprehensive program that includes undergraduates and master's students. We don't have any PhDs, but some of us have postdocs. We're traditionally eligible for R15, but because of actually large training grants like Build Air, which is part of the Build program that NIH sponsored, we were not eligible or have not been eligible for R15s for the last 10 years. So that's been kind of tough. I don't know what was covered before this, but in addition to that, I'm running my own SCORE SC1 grant, which is traditionally given to traditionally underrepresented universities. So ours is a Hispanic serving institution. We have more than 60% Hispanic. We have a large population of students in overall. We have about 40,000 students, both undergrads and grads. So we've been mostly successful in our department with the SCORE grants. Some people were, before eligibility ran out, very successful with the R15s. So the R15s now, the SCORE grants have now been replaced by the R16 SURE grant. So that's something to do with research. I know we're talking about some educational grants as well. So I don't want to repeat anything. So I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the URISE grant? Right.
Sure. So the URISE grant for us has been, I'm a co-PI. The director is Dr. Zavala, so Marielena Zavala. So she has been running the MARC program for us for the underrepresented students for the last 30 years. But about 3 years ago, they changed the MAR program so that we are no longer eligible for the MAR program at the undergraduate level. So we apply for the URISE program. And the URISE program is, again, part of the NIH. And we have a cohort between 7 to 8 students. And we fund students for 2 years to do research. They get to go to conferences. We supplement them with stipends and research funding. So that's been pretty good. The only thing is that, like the last speaker, I think Jill talked about, was running the grant with even 3 of us has been really challenging. And most of the time it's because of the administration. It's not really NIH only, but to implement what we want through the administration and making sure that the funding is all correct administratively can be hard, because that's something that you want to think about is you want to get the grant, but sometimes it starts at the wrong time of the year, which does not align with, for example, the fiscal academic year that the university would like to run it. And depending if you have quarters or semesters, that can be kind of strange. So I would say that that would be like the unanticipated challenge to run grants. Like, for example, the last 2 months of this year, we have to pay students to finish the academic year, but our grant would run out and renew in April, but we finish in June. So how do we pay the last 2 months of stipend? So little things like that, we run into all the time, but I think it's been really good for the students. We're happy to have a follow-up to the MARC program. And we also have what's called the Burgess program, which is the program for master's students. It will be equivalent to the URISE program, except they're in the master's program.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Ray. Mike, do you have a question? I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I did actually. Ray brought something up that I think is important, and I'd like some feedback from the panelists. So, getting a grant is great. Obviously, how is it that you can balance making the objectives of the grant reality when you hit administrative barriers, perhaps within your institution, or barriers that Bryce touched on with teaching load, or other situations that we encounter as undergraduate educators that running a full-time laboratory, you may not hit those same types of barriers. So if you have any input on, after you get a grant and have celebration for the next 4 weeks, how do you spend it on the next 3+ years?
Great question.
Sure, I can just start. So I was lucky because Zavala has been a veteran for 30 years. The other thing that she benefited from when we started our program was that we had an administrator that ran the previous program. So there was a lot of sort of unwritten rules that were part of the culture of running those kind of training grants in our institution. So if you have to start de novo, I would say would probably find somebody else who's running a similar program in an institution with a similar profile as yours, and see how they deal with administrators in that front, because it differs so much between, even when we change administrations and how to run these things. We have what's called a university corporation that runs actually our financial part. And so, Mike, that's all I can say is if you can have some kind of veteran that helps you either in your own institution or in some similar institution, that will be the best way to start, even before you apply for the grant, so that you know what you're proposing can be met. So like things like travel or stipend, and then conferences, these things, we have to run 3 separate sort of funding schemes, I would say schemes, just to make them eligible for both NIH and our own administrative requirements. But it's possible. Again, yeah, if you have to, find somebody to be able to help you out just to get a leg up, I think that would be very, very helpful.
Any other thoughts?
I guess in my first successfully funded federal proposal, I did not put enough money in for people. It required a lot more people than I imagined it would. And so from then on, I always try to prioritize the money for the people. And, really the budget drives everything. So try to do the budget really early in order to get a sense of what I can really do.
So one thing I could add on, thanks, is that, yeah, once you have the budget, you want to get everybody in your institution on board. That includes your dean, and then for us would be the provost, because if they're supportive of the grant, then they would make things happen so that they would, for example, find funding. Like we can't pay more than whatever, I think was 40% of our administrators. So then they would pitch in for the 60% to run, to be able to pay our administrator full time. So that's something that, if you can get your dean to be on board and pitch in so that there is actually money involved, they will be more supportive, and they'll pay more attention to the outcome of your grant, and they will write, letters of support. So that also helps NIH when they see that there's institutional participation, not just you and a couple of other professors, but your dean, your provost, and maybe even your president, depending how big your university is.
Kind of similarly, but on the smaller scale for just like making an R15 run when you're going, similar to getting your administration on board, one thing that my college offers and that I was able to ask for is that my college is matching a course release once I got the grant, so I could write that in. So it's not written into my budget, but Davidson College says, okay, if she gets a grant, we'll give her a course release. So that is one way that that's helpful, and so you can ask about if those potential mechanisms are there. That can be helpful. And then the other one, which was already mentioned by Jill, but I did write part of my aims. A class I teach, for example, is called Lab Methods in Genomics. And so I run what parts of the aims of my grant are going to be data and used as a cure in that class. So folding it into my teaching makes it more feasible during the school year than it otherwise would be.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was just going to add that one other thing to keep in mind is it's easy, I think, to kind of get nervous about, making sure everything is done exactly as it is in the proposal. My experience, at least through NSF, is that they've been pretty willing to work with us when unexpected things and difficulties have come up. For instance, in our current IUs, a large chunk of our budget for the first planning year was for travel to attend training workshops in project-based learning. Then COVID hit, so that was changed, and so that dramatically altered how we were going to be spending our money. But our program officer, gave us some really good advice, and they understood that things happen, and there's other things that can change along the way. But I think, again, keeping in contact with your program officer and letting them know when these barriers come up, and proposing some potential solutions, you'll find, I think, a lot of cases there is some flexibility there.
Yeah, I found that for NSF for sure, because you write a grant, it's a year until it's funded. Our case, a lot of turnover, everything switched around. And that's a different sort of question than actually, so I think Debbie was talking about with an R15, there's these research objectives, and your undergraduates just kind of aren't getting the experiments in, they're distracted by the things aren't working, and it just feels sometimes just daunting and overwhelming. And I think the thing is with NIH, what's going to show you've reached those objectives is that publication. It's like, trying to get, and I have sometimes not done great at that. But I will just take a moment to plug something like, if you're in a model organism field, like the micro publications, think about a place that's maybe, and that's what I should have done. I should bite-size things down a little bit more, not expect that my undergrads are going to have a paper and sell, not happening. I never did. Right. But something like micropub, something shorter. So you have that publication on record. So when you go to resubmit, there's something there.
All great ideas and great advice. Okay, so a lot of people, just in case you haven't been paying attention, a lot of people have been answering questions and posting a lot of resources in the chat. So just be aware that there's lots happening there. There was a question about minimum wage for student researchers for budgeting purposes. And I think someone just posted the federal minimum wage for NIH document. So there you go. I am curious following up on that, for those of you who have undergraduate involved research grants where there's money written in for undergraduate summer research, how do you go about budgeting for say meal stipends? Do you include those, or housing stipends? Like, how are those built in, or are they built in? And is that something that's possible to build in?
In my experience, our college has stopped allowing us to do that for equity reasons across the college, that students were getting paid different. And they set a minimum wage of that, not even a minimum, just the wage that student researchers, and it's a living wage of $15 an hour. So it is just budgeted in that I have to pay. So I just said for mine, it was 9 weeks at 40 hours a week. That $15 an hour, plus you have to pay taxes on top of that called FICA. And so you can budget that in as well. And so that was a way to try to make sure that students had a living wage without the housing.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's important. Our institution's at the point where they are finally upping, for instance, workers for students are going to help us like with lab assistants, because students won't work for minimum wage on campus because they can go down the street and make better. And so it's a problem with the summer fellowships. Like they said, well, I can go home and work construction. I'm just not going to do research because I can make more money. So it is always a struggle to do that and put enough in there. So I'm always pushing my institution to, we got to up this. We have to up this. But you have to know that when you budget and make sure, yeah, you don't forget whatever your, wage and benefit percent is on those grants. But I think we do in terms of equity. Yeah. The students that, sure, I can come do research because I don't have to worry about making money, versus the students that can't because they have to make enough money over the summer and they will make more doing something else.
Right. So some would argue that providing housing on campus actually increases equity. Like it can go both ways depending on how you look at it. Okay. Any other questions?
Should we give some general advice, perhaps?
Perhaps. I have one more question.
Oh, okay, go for it.
And then you can all share your. So there was the comment earlier about the focus on budgeting for people and prioritizing the people. And sorry, the light in my office just went off. So prioritizing the people to do the work. How do you prioritize what type of person, right? So do you budget for undergraduates, technicians, postdocs? How do you make that distinction? Because even at primary undergrad institutions, you can have technicians and you could have a postdoc, or you could pay the undergrads, right? So how do you make those decisions?
In my case, I would put it in a program manager. But I have a little different situation, so but it's going to be the person who is mostly responsible for making the day-to-day work.
Anyone else have any thoughts, or where you put your human funds?
So for me, the person that is the most important person is the lab manager or the lab technician. Most of my publications stem from the work that they were able to continuously do over, maybe 1 or 2 years. And they're also the go-to person when you're just looking for, stuff in your lab because you haven't been there for a couple of weeks as, you've been teaching. And they provide the human sort of knowledge that you need for students to identify too, that, hey, one day they could be as competent as the lab manager or lab technician. So for me, that's the most important person.
For our IUs and STEM grants, since they're so focused on generating practices within the classroom to help undergraduate students, probably the majority of our personnel funds have actually gone to faculty members for teaching, the people who would be using those methods in their classes. Other times, though, it will be dictated by the grant. Like we just applied for an NSF grant through the RAMP program, and it mandated that we have to have a project coordinator. So of course, we're going to put that in there. We've applied for another one in the past that didn't necessarily mandate, but strongly encouraged teaching and learning assistants, right? So we made sure to set up a system of TLAs, which we would be paying undergraduate students. So a lot of times the grant will tell you, give you some strong hints about what they want as far as who you're going to be supporting.
Great, thank you. All right. So unless someone wants to add anything to that, I'm going to open it up.
I was just going to add one short comment. This is something that I ran up against years ago when I had a grant and I wrote a technician into the grant. I was pretty new, so I didn't have a lot of, I wouldn't have thought about, students graduating that could be a technician. But being in very isolated central Pennsylvania, I had a really hard time actually hiring a technician. They're just, people with the expertise aren't around and they're not going to drive an hour for a job. So if you're thinking about doing that and you're rurally isolated, think about who might be able to fit into that position. I said, doing it again, I would have worked hard on finding like a student graduating, said, hey, do you want to put off going to grad school for a year or two, work on this because you're already working on it. And those gap years are much more common now than before students went right off to grad school. Now I think they're more willing to, yeah, I think I will just, maybe take some time first.
Mike, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I mean, just like off of what Jill said, could it be argued that the gap year is an extension of undergraduate training if it is an R15 mechanism, for example? So one could say maybe that is an extension of their undergraduate experience. It's pre-graduate work still. Maybe it's a post-bac. And maybe that's a way to be creative with that type of budget, where, because the struggle with undergraduate research one of the struggles is by the time they're trained and good, they leave. So you're always on that treadmill trying to get new people in. So I mean, and that's kind of what I've been encountering in my own work.
Yeah, and yeah, it's an excellent point. Mike's right, because it's just about the time you get them trained, they're good to go. And I said my biggest catch-22 being in a little school was students would apply to go to other research programs at bigger places, which is a great experience for a student between their junior and senior year, but then takes out my having them for a summer to do the work. But they need those experiences. But the post-bac, there are funding mechanisms for post-bac programs. If you have a research grant, I think you can apply for those. And so you can add like a post-bac on, but it has to be a research grant.
Great, thank you. Okay, so with that, I will open it up to each of the panelists if they would like to add some general advice, words of wisdom, things they wish they knew, anything you want.
I have some.
Great, go for it.
Jump in. So my biggest thing, if I'm going to tell you anything, is know your institute at NIH. The funding rates for R15s are not equal. NIGMS funds R15s way more than any others. So think about that. Look at what type of grant you're going on and see how much. They might have a solicitation open for it, but that doesn't mean they fund a lot of those. And so you need to look at funding rates. And then within that, so that's your first level of organization. Then your second level of organization is go in and find the study section that aligns best with you. And that's where NIH Reporter and identifying similar applications and who's reviewed them and been successful can go a long, long way. So doing your homework on your institute can really, really change your odds. And if you find yourself, you're like, oh, when I was a postdoc or whatever, my PI always had R01s from this institute, but they don't fund R15s that much. Maybe reimagine how you can frame your research, especially as us being model organism research, and many of us can go to NIGMS, that can align with them so that the mechanisms align best.
Great advice.
I have two pieces. The
Okay.
first one is to make it sticky. Because if in an NIH review, for example, there'll be, 3 people who are reading your proposal, and one of those is the person who's going to explain it in 5 minutes to everybody else. And then, those 3 people are going to set the range, and then everybody in the section is going to vote within that range. So that one person like is got to be able to like get it and represent it in 5 minutes. And so it's got to like stick, right? Like it's got to be something where you can turn to someone and explain it like that. The second thing is that you want to make it coherent, and it's kind of related to that. Like you want to align your aims and your approach and your evaluation or research component tightly so that it all fits together. And you want to kind of empathize with your reviewer because they're busy like you and they have this big stack of things to read. And you know, it's got to be coherent, or they're just going to be like, oh, I'm struggling too much. And so make it easy for the reviewer to figure out what you want to do.
So I'll just add to that. I think other things that you can add to make it sticky are maybe letters of support from collaborators in ROI institutions if you want to do more research on that. And for example, if you want certain instruments that obviously your institution might not support or have, that would be a good way to make sure that you have the expertise or the instrument that you need to do your research. So having like support from people in your community, like your research community, would really help to make sure that the NIH can see that this is going to succeed, because you have people to help you if you run into any problems.
Going back to coherence, I can't emphasize, I want to back that up. I can't emphasize enough just how important it is to make your application really a nice, smooth flowing narrative where everything connects to everything else. You really don't want any stray pieces of information or goals or focuses or activities. They really want to see how everything ties together to something else to advance towards the common goal of everything that you're doing. So that can make the difference between, you know, something considered, you know, a quality proposal but just not good enough, or another one that is really going to stand out. Another piece of advice I would give is to stick with it, be patient. Don't get discouraged, because odds are you're probably not going to get funded the first times. It took us 3 tries to get our STEM funded. If you are nervous about thinking this is an all or nothing thing, don't think of it that way. The way I always approach it is I'm assuming we're probably going to get rejected the first time. If it gets funded, then great, that's a fantastic surprise. But it allows me to be a little bit more, I think, open to reading reviewer comments and really seeing how those can be used to refine the proposal, tighten it up, and make it something that is going to have a better chance of getting funded the next time.
That's great. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to ask or add before we take a little break?
I have one small thing, actually.
Sure, go for it.
NSF has a lot of supplements. If you have an NSF research grant, there's supplements that you can apply for. So for example, my postdoc advisor after I'd moved here, he had a NSF research grant, and then we used that to apply for a supplement for a summer student that like worked with me at Davidson College. So there's supplements for people that have grants that you can partner with that make some things available. And also if you are an instructor at a primarily undergraduate institute, you can get supplements to go somewhere to maybe to learn a new technique or something from a grant that already exists. And that's a nice mechanism too.
Yes. Anything else? Okay. So I think I've done my part. So I'm gonna turn it back over to Bryce.
Hey, thanks, Taewin. And thanks to and thanks to all of our presenters. That was great. I feel like I learned a lot. Hope everyone else did. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to share a couple action items for this meeting. So first off, we'll be sending a follow-up email soon after this to all registrants. We'll include slides from presenters, so you'll have those. Pretty stoked about those resources myself. We'll also be sending a crowdsourced list of grants. So when you first get it, it's going to be a spreadsheet with just a few grant opportunities that came up during the talks today. But if you come across a grant that you think would be a great fit for someone, go ahead and add it to there, share it with the community. I know we can all be kind of competitive in science, but if you have something especially that you think would be useful to others, add it in there. And then we're also going to be doing some writing group pairing. So we'll send out a survey. If you're interested in finding a buddy to write a grant with, or just someone to get feedback from, add your contact information in there, add some info about what types of grants you're looking to apply to. I know I want to sign up for one just to get paired up with a yeast genetics person. Being at a PUI, I'm the only yeast person and the only genetics person. So I'll be looking for people to just read my grants, tear them apart, and I'll give them some feedback as well. So keep an eye out for those links. And thanks for coming. With that, I will, after Mike's going to talk a little bit, after he's done, we'll have a virtual happy hour. So stick around if you want to chat with anyone. And take it away.
All right. Well, first off, I'd like to thank everybody for coming to the two keynotes. Thank you so much for the information. I know it was informative for everyone. For our panelists, thank you for your insight in sharing your experience with obtaining grants and how to manage those, especially for our participants, the people that came to the session. I'm really happy that we were able to convene everyone. I'd like to point out that we do have a few things coming up. Always keep your eyes on your email. We have a big brew event that we're planning for the summer, and it will be a surprise to all of you because it is currently a surprise to us. So keep that in mind. We'd love to see you again. And as Bryce mentioned, we're going to keep the Zoom open for a little while. So we're going to set up some breakout rooms. If you want to chat with anyone, step aside to a breakout room. If not, look for those emails. Please participate in our surveys so that we can get some information as we start to build our NSF grant that we will submit for Mary to look at, maybe if she's still there in the future. And we're looking forward to seeing you all again. Thanks so much. Good luck for the rest of your semester.